I want to say thank you to everyone coming in. People are coming in slowly, so we'll get started in a sec. In the meantime, I'm going to share this with you guys. Okay, Nuri, I think I got everyone, so whenever
Great.
you'd like.
So I was just thinking we could give folks a few more minutes to come on in. So we'll start at 11:04 Central Time, 12:04 Eastern, which will give us 2 more minutes to let folks show up.
I'm going to put the flyer back up. There we go.
Okay, Mama, let's go. We're gonna get ready. I want you to get ready. We're gonna take the next.
All right, Jose, whenever you're ready, I'm ready to get started.
All right, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel, Women Talking, Celebrating Progress in Public Administration. It is my honor to that Dr. Diggs asked me to help out today and moderate this incredible panel of amazing women who are leading the field in public administration right now. I'm going to start with a brief introduction, and then we'll dive right into questions, hopefully leaving some time for questions at the end. Wanted to start by introducing the section on democracy and social justice of ASPA, which is a collection of scholars promoting constructive, just, and democratic social change through teaching, research, practice, conferences, and publications. It is also the fertile soil from which the Journal of Social Equity and Public Administration grew. And I wanted to thank specifically Dr. Irizarry and Dr. Diggs for their contributions to the section and for inviting me to become more involved in the section's activities, including asking me to moderate today. I'm going to introduce our panelists. We've got 4 panelists, one from 4 different ranks. So it's really a delight to introduce them. Also, their rank order happens to be the alphabetical order. So I'm going in alphabetical order, starting with Dr. Sebawit Bisho, who is an assistant professor at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington, Seattle. Her many publications include explorations of gender in public management, and especially among city managers, studies of gendered practices in organizations, and how individuals respond to those gendered expectations, and also how managerial authority differs between men and women leaders. She's been awarded several times for her research and service, including the prestigious Harvard Kennedy School of Government Fellowship in the Women in Public Policy program. At the associate professor rank, we have Nicole Elias, who is at the Department of Public Management at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in the City University of New York system. I'm from City College of New York. That's my undergrad, so really glad to have some CUNY represented here. Her research looks at gender and sexual orientation at all levels of government and ethics, with a particularly interesting emphasis on transgender legal codes and workplace equity. She also has edited multiple volumes, including most recently the Handbook of Gender in Public Administration. She, along with fellow panelist Dr. D'Agostino, are the founding co-directors of the Innovative Initiative for Gender Equity in the Public Sector. Next, we have at the professor rank, Dr. Maria D'Agostino, who is a professor of public administration, also at the Department of Public Management at John Jay College. Her research on gender in public administration goes back to the seminal volume of Women in Public Administration in 2010, a volume she co-edited. Her research continues to challenge our perceptions of gender in the public sector, plumbing the many ways that women in leadership and anti-woman bias influence public organizations during COVID and #MeToo. Her awards include the Section for Women in Public Administration and Mentorship Award and the Rita Mae Kelly Distinguished Research Award for Research on Women and Public Administration. Last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Mary Ellen Guy, who needs no introduction, but she's out of luck because I'm giving her one anyway. Dr. Guy is co-chief editor of the Journal on Social Equity in Public Administration and an ASPA fellow currently at the CU Denver School of Public Affairs. With 3 degrees in psychology and counseling, she is known for her work on emotional labor and especially the emotional skills demanded of public servants in emotionally intense positions. She's also a leading thinker on social equity in public administration and on gender equity. While I could highlight many different research projects, I choose to highlight her book, Women and Men of the State, as one of the great texts on state-level governance of any kind, and as the title suggests, highlights gender as a powerful lens for better understanding governance in general. In addition to all her many awards, including the prestigious Dwight Waldo Award, Dr. Guy is the first ever woman to hold an appointment as Distinguished Professor at the University of Colorado, Denver. Thank you so much to these amazing panelists. I want to now step back and be in the background and let you all speak to the questions that we've prepared and sent to you. And so I'll start by directing my first question toward Dr. Bisho. And when after each question is answered, please anyone else can chime in and contribute. As a woman in the field, Dr. Bisho, how have the contributions of what are called pioneer or seasoned female scholars informed your academic life?
Thank you, Dr. Heckler, and to the rest of the panelists. I'm so happy to be here with you and sharing this platform with you. I think I want to open my response by sharing a little bit of my experience of having been mentored by Dr. Mary Guy, who is also here as part of our panel. So in 2015 or 2016, while I was a doctoral student, Dr. Guy was appointed as my mentor in the Founders Fellows program of ASPA. And I will say that Mary took me under her wings and essentially took that central role in mentoring, coaching, and really supporting my work and eventually becoming a collaborator in a couple of projects that I've done in the last few years. I want to highlight how that was important for me as an immigrant who came from architecture. So this career is a second career for me. So really understanding the culture of academia, but also the field of public administration, public management was completely new for me, right? So I was introduced by it when I did my MPA and then PhD. But that becoming a part of that system was also a work in progress for me. And really, Dr. Guy took that role in helping me grow in that area of my academic life. So I cannot thank her enough, but also highlight the importance of that. So then substantively, just want to quickly share that I would say there are buckets of scholars or streams of scholarship that have really informed, that continue to have informed in the past and continue to inform my scholarly work. I would say works by Dr. Guy and Sharon, I'm blanking on the last name, but from University of Utah. Mary Guy, can you help me with the last name? Because I want to get it right.
Mastracci,
yes, exactly. Mastracci on emotional labor, and but also scholars from the social psychology and sociology. I think I've learned a lot from works by Joan Acker and others who have really studied gendered organizations. But coming back into a very important part of my identity as an immigrant, as my invisible social identity, but also as a Black woman from Africa working here in the US, I think work done by women of intersectional identity like Tia Gaynor and Brandy Blessed and Caroline Barnes and others who really looked into the intersectional identity, including gender, sexual orientation, and race and other forms of identity, and understanding this interface between the civilians and the state, right? So that relationship and understanding some of the isms that are deeply embedded in that. So those scholarly works have really informed who I am as a scholar. What I have not found yet, and hope to be a pioneer or even a path maker, so to say, for myself, is understanding bringing this invisible identity of being an immigrant, public man, how that form of social identity informs that civilian and state interaction, or that within the state organizations, and being what it means to be immigrant with multiple identities in society, right? So that is a form of work that I have not been able to find much, and that I hope to really bring into my work in the future. So I will stop here.
Thank you so much. Who else would like to contribute to the question about how pioneer or seasoned female scholars have informed your academic life?
I'll jump in, Nuri, if that's okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you to everyone for inviting me here. I'm always honored and flattered to be invited, and so happy to contribute. I just wanted to add on that I think there's certainly been many non-academic women pioneers in my life that have directly and indirectly informed my career. But in terms of scholars, if I were just to focus in, especially at the very start of my career at John Jay, that has been Marilyn Rubin, who was on my hiring committee at John Jay at the time, and one of the few women on faculty, as Nuri pointed out, was way back then. It made me feel very old, but way back then at John Jay. And so when I met Marilyn, she was the first PA scholar that I met that specifically researched gender in public administration, although it was gender budgeting and something that I've never heard about at that time. She did ask me to work with her on a project looking at the progression of women leadership at ASPA. And so that was very influential in terms of my career trajectory. I haven't looked back since, and have continued to explore areas of women in leadership and gender issues throughout my academic career. And then I just have to very briefly mention, briefly only because of time, is Mary Ellen Guy's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. I kind of want to see a part 2 about that, because it's one that I still refer to now with colleagues, with students, in trying to make sense of what's going on in public administration and society as a whole in terms of women's progress. And so there are many more pioneers that I would mention, but just for this one short webinar, I'll just focus on those. So thank you.
Nicole, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. Thanks, Nuri. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and especially to DSJ and the organizers for including me. It's a huge honor to be in the company of this group and to be invited today. So thank you for that. I would say I remember being a grad student at Virginia Tech and reading Bureau Men, Settlement Women by Cam Stivers for the first time and thinking, aha, here it is. So along with, of course, the nods to Mary, I would put Cam Stivers and Susan Gooden as 2 of the influential scholars who have shaped my academic trajectory in thinking about women, gender, social equity. And I just want to add that there are some, less seasoned or emerging scholars that have been incredibly influential. So I'm going to give a nod to Sebawit, as well as Brandy Blissett, Tia Gaynor, and Seba's counterpart in some recent publications that have been stellar, Andrea Headley, just in pushing the envelope and continuing to really progress the field on these themes. But beyond the scholarly contributions, I just want to echo what Maria said, this mentorship piece, and Sebawit said, this mentorship piece really informed my work and pushed that forward as well. And so working on the Handbook of Gender and PA with Pat Shields was huge. Just learning from her and understanding the history of PA, how her scholarship evolved over time, and the mentorship that I received in that project was immense. And of course, Maria, we've been working on IGEPs now for a decade, which is unbelievable to say, but to grow that from really an idea at John Jay, in my first year in 2013 to the community that we've built today has been incredibly rewarding. So we've got to do some really neat projects working with practitioners and students that have really been instrumental in helping me to understand and contribute to our understanding of gender equity.
Mary, would you like to take us home?
Yeah, I sure would. So it is great to be here. And it's just, it's so interesting to me when I'm asked a question like this to think about who really informed my academic life. And so I thought back and I thought, well, when I started going to conferences in the late 70s and early 80s, I would look out and see a sea of suits and ties, and there would be just a handful of women in the audience. And I made it my business to get to know those women because I knew what they had to have gone through to get there. So let me tell you about just one and the impact that she and her work had on me, helping to enthuse you to move this forward. And that is Naomi Lynn. Naomi Lynn was the third woman president of the American Society for Public Administration. She started off as a political science professor at Kansas and then became a department head. Then she became dean at Georgia State, and then she became chancellor at Illinois Springfield. But while she was dean at Georgia State, let me tell you what she did. She collaborated with three first ladies, Rosalind Carter, Betty Ford, and Lady Bird Johnson. And she sponsored, a lot, working with others, lots of others in the Atlanta area, a conference called Women and the Constitution. This was in 1988. It was a small conference, but it was so incredibly powerful because these were the people, the women that I got to see, talk to, and listen to, and learn from. They were Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a Supreme Court justice at the time, Barbara Jordan, an incredible powerhouse of a speaker and member of Congress, Gloria Steinem, the flag bearer for the feminist movement, certainly in the 70s, Eleanor Holmes Norton, a mover and shaker in Washington, D.C., Coretta Scott King, wife of Martin, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, before she was even named to the Supreme Court, Sarah Weddington, the attorney who moved the Roe v. Wade case, Rosa Parks, the woman who is credited with starting the Montgomery bus boycott, Bella Abzug, who was a flamethrower and member of Congress. And I listened to them. They were so powerful. Did I mention Geraldine Ferraro, the first woman vice presidential candidate? These women were so notable to me. And when I listened to them, I was rapt. And when I got in the car to drive home after that conference, I thought this was the most fabulous meeting I had ever been in. And these were the most powerful women in the United States. And they fit into one small conference room, one small conference room. And I thought, okay, I had been told not to work on gender, that I would never get published and so forth and so on. And I wasn't working on it at that point. But by the time I had like a 2.5 hour drive to get home. And by the time I was home, I had committed myself to write about what was in my heart, write about what I knew, write about women's experience, bring to the forefront the incredible inequity in terms of who gets to the top and how this caste system works in terms of women's roles versus men's roles. But that conference was so seminal for me that I hope, Seba, listening to your comments about thinking about immigration and the intersectionality that your life brings, that in fact you will speak to your heart. Because, I mean, writing nonfiction, writing scholarly work is just like writing fiction. Write about what you know, because that's where the power is and that's where the passion is. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much. If you're not hooked on this panel yet, I mean, so next I'd like to direct the next question to Dr. Elias. What would you say are the most significant advances for women in public administration?
That's a great question, Nuri. I would say the first step is just the sheer acknowledgement that women exist. As Mary said, you look at this sea of suits, but that acknowledgement is so powerful. And then from there, we've entered into this pivotal moment in PA where we're now recognizing not only are women here and they're impactful and their presence is valuable, but there are different kinds of women with particular life experiences and circumstances and identities. And along with that, recognizing that there are structural challenges associated with those particulars that impact women in PA and other fields. So I think in terms of advancements, that is what I would say is the fundamental scholarly advancement, just the sheer acknowledgement piece, and then the acknowledgement of difference, and within that broader category of who counts as a woman. And then from there, I see the more pragmatic advances. So, first, the numbers, who's in the room, who's at the table, especially who occupies the leadership positions. So looking at ASPA presidents, even section leadership and membership. And then that really plays a huge symbolic and practical a value to the field. So that impacts the way we operate as scholars and practitioners and how we include future generations.
Thank you. Doctors Bisho, D'Agostino, or Guy, would anyone like to add to that?
I'll say something. What I would say is that women are no longer the exception. We do not have to disguise ourselves. For example, when I was writing back in the 70s and 80s, I realized I had better luck getting accepted if I used my first initial rather than my name, Mary. Well, we're now at the point where women's voices are okay. But this is my fight. And many of you have co-authored with me, and you've heard me argue always not for using APA style, but for using Chicago, because APA was at the time, back in the 70s and 80s, it was seen as progressive to disguise people's gender. That's why those initials are used for the first names. Well, that was useful then. We don't need to do that anymore. And other citation styles let us at least use a woman's name. We don't have to disguise ourselves anymore. So that's what I would say.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. D'Agostino?
Hi. Yeah, so I'm just going to focus on, I think there's definitely been a lot of progress both what I think Nicole and Mary have mentioned. I'm going to focus on a project that I've been working with Nicole and some of our students as part of IJEPS. And what we've been doing is an overview of legislation and policies across several countries that support including and promoting women in PA leadership positions. And we looked at one of the UN sustainability goals, which is an achievement of itself. It looks at gender equality. And a lot of themes came out of it, but one of the themes that has emerged is the importance of supporting women, not just women, but parents in terms of childcare. And there really were some innovative takes and kind of, lessons learned from that perhaps that we could use also in the US. And for example, providing parental leave, not just to the parents, but for example, to the child's grandmother or grandfather with the assumption that they're providing childcare. Or, if a woman returns to work part-time, they still have access to receiving some kind of a child benefit. And so those are just some of the small things, not small, actually, I think they're quite big things that have emerged in terms of what is going on in terms of promoting and supporting women in leadership, in PA leadership positions.
Thank you. Dr. Bisho, anything to add?
Sure. So when I think about some of the substantive advancements that have been made in the field, I do totally agree with all that has been shared, particularly that gender matters. We do know, I don't think we have to make that argument again and again and try to get our voices heard that gender matters. I think that has been established. And yet, I think, particularly in public management and public administration, what is, in my opinion, what is left to do is how does it matter and when does it matter and to whom does it matter? Yes, gender matters, but how does it matter to different types of women, right? Or bringing in that intersectionality lens. So I think there is still a lot of work to be done. Maybe I could make a very quick pitch into some work that I'm currently doing that's under review, where I apply the representative bureaucracy theory to the physician and family planning health service seekers, that is women in the sub-Saharan African context, and that interaction and trying to understand how gendered interaction matters between the physician or the service provider and the service recipient. And what I'm finding is that, yes, gender representation matters positively for the service providers where they engage more when it's female providers engage more interactively with the patients more than their male counterparts. But that reverse relationship we would have assumed in the American context or in other service contexts has mixed results, where women service recipients, when it comes to seeking technical information about the contraceptive method that they're being recommended, they seem to engage more with the male provider, because within that social context, and that's really the theoretical argument that we're making, because of the family planning decisions are primarily male dominant in that context. So men decide on when to have a child, right, how many children to have and such in the family context. So that symbolic relevant we would have assumed to have a positive impact for a service recipient seems to have the opposite effect in that particular context. So if we were to take this assumption, representation matters, and make that policy argument, let's have all women, increase women's, yes, it can have a positive effect, but it is not sufficient. So all that to say, context matters, but we need to even dice and slice and understand when and how it matters for the women we're serving, but also for the women in our public institutions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bisho. The next question really is on that problem that Dr. Irizarry was bringing up before this panel started, that when we look at the bookshelf, we don't see a lot of women on the PA bookshelf. For many public administration students, course material spotlighting the contributions of women has been limited to Mary Parker Follett and maybe Camilla Stivers. What impact has this had on the course material you present to your students and the focus of your research? And what women and practitioners from PA history should we be teaching? I'm going to start with Dr. Guy, and then Dr. Bisho, I'm going to follow up with you.
You know, let me tell you several things. Number one, we ought to be teaching Jane Addams. We ought to be teaching about her pragmatism. We ought to be teaching about the debate she had with the Principles and Proverbs guys about what city management is. Her argument was that we should be thinking about cities as extended families, and thereby drawing out the kinds of administrative services that you need to provide to a huge family. That's not the side of the debate that prevailed. The side that prevailed was that city management is really like managing a business, and it's all about economics. And look where that has taken us. But the wisdom there is just fabulous. And also, you know, obviously there's Frances Perkins, there's Eleanor Roosevelt and what she went through in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But there's Mary Schmidt in Parr on grout. It's her way of saying there are multiple ways of knowing, and we need to acknowledge that. The field is moving a little closer to that. But Laverne Birchfield, just as I had said to the first question, when I got into this game, I made it my business to pay attention to the women who had been there before me. And I'd always seen Laverne Birchfield's name for years as a managing editor of Parr. So when Cam Stivers and Larry Terry became editors of Parr, they also were curious about Laverne, and they asked me to investigate her. So I started doing the research. It turned out to be one of the most fun articles I've ever done. But I mean, the truth hit home when I interviewed so many men, Herb Simon and, you know, all of the Dons, you know, all the people of her generation. But when Pendleton Herring, who, you know, had been president of Princeton and so forth, and editor-in-chief of Parr, he was the man who told the truth. I simply said, tell me about Laverne Birchfield as managing editor when you were editor-in-chief. And he said, well, she did all the work. They just needed my name. And he just said it just like that. There are so many women who have been doing the writing, but in fact, their names got obscured. It was Laverne Birchfield who edited the Brownlow report after Brownie and the boys sat there and had their evenings talking and determined, you know, what the report should say. And then Laverne takes it. If we just look at what is handed to us, it will always be the man's voice. If we look harder and draw it out and bring it to our students' attention, then they will get the woman's voice. So I'll be quiet.
Dr. Bisho?
It's hard to follow that, but let me add to Dr. Guy's perspective. So I think I would like to reflect a little bit on, I think Nicole just rightly identified, right? Like we have the season and then we have the emerging, but really, I would say even more established, right, as scholars of our time. I would say there are two groups of scholarship to me that I think are very important as we move the needle forward in understanding gendered nature, understanding gender in general in public management. There is this scholarship from the social psychology and the sociology literature, and there's also scholarship within, and even political science and business administration. And then we have scholarship within our field. I think within our field, without a doubt, Dr. Mary Ellen Guy and her co-authors were her work, and then others that she's collaborated with on emotional labor, right? I think that has really opened our eyes to the additional and extra work that women engage in, and in public service delivery and just in public administration in general. I would say and Marilyn Rubin's work on gendered budgeting, right? Really trying to understand how, right? Like, you know, if you want to know that it's what is important for government or for any institution, look at their finances, look at where they invest, right? So, and in that, and I would also say really a work that really excites me is also Shannon Portillo and Dominic Bearfield and Nicole Humphreys' work on the myth of bureaucratic neutrality. I think that work is pushing the boundaries of how we perceive and interpret and really give value to representation and the weight of representation. It's also really pushing the assumptions and of bureaucratic neutrality. So I think that their work is, I would say, I would add that work in any public administration or public management core work courses that I teach. And then in the broader social psychology and sociology, I think Joanne Acker's work in business administration. And I had the opportunity, Nuri shared earlier, so I did a 3 years fellowship at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And one thing that fellowship did to me was introduce me to the gender, race, and organizations group within the HBS and the Kennedy School. And Marlon Rubin, not Marlon, Ruben Ellie, Hannah Riley Bowles, like there are scholars who do very similar work, but not necessarily in public organizations, and sometimes in public organizations. And I think we will do ourselves service to look into that work and really borrow and learn from all the advancements that have been done in the field. One thing that I dream about, and hopefully we will move this needle forward in the future, and is, so, since moving to the Evans School a year ago at the University of Washington, our MPA program has this emphasis on international development. And it has really opened my eyes to how many of our MPA students potentially go and work in the American Foreign Services, working abroad in international nonprofit or multilateral organizations, right? So, but very little work is done in training our AMP students on how context matters, but also how to see public administration and public management in socio-political, geographic context outside of the US. And there's power dynamics when public administrators from the Western world go and work in countries like my own in Ethiopia, in the sub-Saharan African region, and Asia. And we do very little to reflect on how, in that power relations, that dynamics, and what it means to work as an expatriate, as a public administrator in different institutional and political, geopolitical contexts. So that is, I'm yet to find that, I'm yet to see that, but I think that's a hole in our literature or scholarly advancement in public administration.
Thank you, Dr. Bisho. And in handing it over to Dr. Elias and Dr. D'Agostino, this question about who should we be highlighting, what women scholars should we be highlighting in our courses, I wanted to highlight their own initiative for gender equity in the public sector, and if they wouldn't mind speaking a bit to that.
Hi, yes. So I'll start and I'll have Nicole finish. So I just wanted to add on, I think, to what Mary said and Seba said in terms of including, broadening the classics definitely, and then needing to include diverse scholarship, right, from a broad spectrum of scholars and perspectives, and in both research and in the classroom. And this was one of the items that emerged out of a discussion that we had, Nicole and myself, with Megan Hatch a while back, when she was on the Academic Women MPA board, after she published her JPay article, the misalignment of the 3 C's in public administration. And one of the things that emerged from this discussion was a collaboration in the creation of what we refer to as the reference tool, or the REF tool. And that could be found on the IJEPS and the Academic Women MPA website. And one of the main goals is to help us diversify the resources used in teaching, and also in our research, and to try to promote the work of those that are promote the work of authored, sorry, I lost my train. So promote the work of those who are writing about different perspectives, and those that are have been historically underrepresented. And so I guess there's a lot of ways and interests to get beyond what, to have a broader spectrum of literature that we can use, not just books, right? Not that I don't think that books are not important, but there's a lot out there that people are publishing that we need to incorporate in the classroom and in our research. But I'll turn it over to Nicole to speak briefly about IJEPS.
Thanks, Maria and Nuri. So IJEPS has been around about 10 years, but only in the past 2 years has it been IJEPS. So right now it's the Initiative for Gender Equity in the Public Sector, IJEPS. But prior to that, from 2013 through 2021, it was WPS, Women in the Public Sector. And so when we, way back in 2013, started recognizing, okay, more attention needs to focus on gender in PA, whether it's research, whether it's preparing students in the classroom as future practitioners to take on these important decisions and important policymaking roles. We really need to better prepare students. We need to engage the practitioner world and figure out what's going on there. And we as academics need to make a concerted effort to draw our attention to gender. So we started off as WPS in 2013. We had a really great run with the women focus. We got a lot done. We worked with many practitioners, dozens of students. We had great ASPA events, SWAPA, APA collaborations. But during the pandemic, I think when everyone was sort of having these soul searching moments, we did the same, and we realized, okay, this is more than just women. This is SOGI. So it's sexual orientation, gender identity. That's what we really mean when we say gender. So in order to, align what we really meant with what we were doing and who we were calling ourselves, we did what any good organization does, and that's go through a whole rebranding process. And that took a good chunk of the summer. And then we came out as IJEPS. And since then, our mission, our values, our work really aligns. And what we do as IJEPS is really try to bring all of these communities together. So our scholarly community within ASPA and other professional organizations, as well as our students and John Jay and across the world, really, and also the practitioner world. We've been really fortunate in that we've had the opportunity to work with entities in public service and nonprofits, from New York City Girl Scouts to the Gender Equity Commission in New York City to the UN, or even at the federal and state level. We've got entities in New York that have been so informative for the research and the work and the events that we're able to host and sponsor, and really help everyone come together and learn more about how we can improve both scholarship and practice to push gender equity forward. With that, I do want to make one connection to the original question you asked, Nuri, about course material. One, this is a great example of how we had two of our IJEPS fellows, Vanessa and Eric, great students, work with Maria and I on a forthcoming JSEPA article. Thanks, Mary, for that. Gender equity in public affairs, pedagogy, structure, content, and practice for a more inclusive public sector. So basically taking what we know is important and making recommendations for how to implement that in your teaching, in your pedagogy, so that we better equip future public administrators to act in a gender equitable way.
Thank you so much. We're running short on time, but we do have one more question that's of utmost importance. And I'm going to actually combine the last two questions that I originally sent your way, folks. So Bell Hooks was writing about feminism back in the 1980s, and she recognized a problem that I think everyone on this panel has already recognized with this quote. Privileged feminists have largely been unable to speak to, with, and for diverse groups of women because they either do not understand fully the interrelatedness of sex, race, and class oppression, or refuse to take this interrelatedness seriously. This is a challenge I believe social equity in public administration and public administration gender equity scholars have taken very seriously in recent years, not the least of which with Brandy Blessett's article arguing for an intersectionality framework. So my last question, I'm going to start with Dr. D'Agostino, is how does intersectionality and Hooks' interrelatedness inform the research by women, about women, and for women moving forward? And what would you like to build on as we move into this intersectional world? And what contributions would you like to leave behind as your legacy?
Thanks, Nuri. I could be brief. So just in thinking about how even the last question, I was listening to everyone, I'm thinking, I never read Hooks as a PhD student, and maybe that's something that, we should incorporate more in our classroom. But that aside, I think one approach in terms of moving forward and moving women forward is definitely doing research with those that have different perspectives and different positionality. And in thinking about this question, I thought about an article that was published by Trachman, Viswanathan, Puello, and Larson, where in this article, they acknowledge the importance of positionality in their method, and they note the value in their analysis and in their findings because they did this. And perhaps this is an approach, right, that we as scholars should consider more, in terms of like methods and how we teach methods. Maybe this should become part of like how we teach methods. So I think there's a vast, space for us to, make this change and consider intersectionality and Hooks. And this just to briefly to that last question that we're now combining here, I would just say that in different stages of my career, I've had different motivations and goals, right? And always in terms of how I could fill the gaps in terms of women in leadership positions and gender and how I could push that forward. And I now, as a professor and in my different roles at IJEPS, Academic Women in PA, things are sort of coming full circle, and collaborating with students and emerging scholars and simply mentoring emerging scholars and even students is an opportunity for me in this, time to kind of put, my research into practice, and I'm really enjoying that.
Thank you so much. Dr. Elias, would you like to build on that?
Sure. I would say, I just want to acknowledge that the intersectionality piece, recognizing those multiple systems of oppression at work and privilege at work, it's really important for how we look at and understand these pervasive problems that we study. And it's certainly so important to include those multiple and overlapping identities. At the same time, the caveat is this is a heavy burden for researchers. Ultimately, it's a good thing in, you know, how we're able to see and move forward from that. In terms of, you know, what I would like to really contribute to the field and what really motivates my research, I would say the SOGI identities that haven't been acknowledged in the literature. Again, thinking about how we move from women, who counts as a woman, you know, that's a contested idea in and of itself. So I think the non-binary, the trans work that I've done recently with collaborators and students has been incredibly rewarding for me. And I would really like to continue to contribute to that vein of research for the remainder of my career.
Thank you, Dr. Elias. Dr. Guy?
Let me just follow on with that. I mean, one point of view, one set of embodied experiences cannot speak for others. And that is the richness of Hooks's message, to pay attention to the nuance. And that takes me to the legacy question, which I would answer this way. And that is, I want each of you to have the courage and the resilience and the ownership of yourself and your point of view, and bring that to bear to your work. It may not be mainstream, but if you stick with it long enough, there will be others who have the same understandings. And in fact, they will find you. And that's how you build a research venue and a research network, and then a language, and then a very respected set of books on the shelf that are seen as mainstream. It takes about 20 years to move a new idea into the mainstream of the field. So start now and have the courage to stick with it.
And to end where we began with Dr. Bisho, who at the beginning said she hoped to be a pioneer herself one day, I wondered what your legacy is and how you want to incorporate intersectionality in the field.
Thank you, Dr. Heckler. All right, before I answer that question, I wanted to highlight very quickly, I think we've talked about the important work women are doing in the field. I also think it is very important to recognize the work non-women, like men and others, have contributed to moving the needle forward in understanding gender and its consequences in the field. I mean, I think I consider myself so lucky to have collaborated with a number of them. I think Dr. Nuri, Heckler, you work on understanding masculinity. I think that has illuminated our eyes, you know, opened our eyes to see how masculinity works within our system. Essentially, that helps us understand how gender matters. I think Dr. Mohammed Al-Qadri, my dissertation chair and mentor, his work on understanding how gender operates in institutions, and others, many that have come along, as Sean McCandless from UIS, his work also has really helped. So I think that has to be recognized, right? Our work does not have to be necessarily always siloed, although we have to recognize the work of women. But then also the work of Norma Rukuchi, right? Like in understanding how gender matters at the interface between the state and the people. I think that work has, has to be recognized and also incorporated in the work that we do. Now, coming back to my legacy, sorry for taking a couple of more minutes, but coming back to my legacy. So the way I see it, we are now here in the US, and I want to qualify that because I don't want to pigeonhole myself to just work here just in the US. I hope to work more in the African context, in the other contexts, to understand. There we know less about how gender works. Here in the US, we are learning and moving the needle forward in understanding how gender matters. We know less on how it matters. How it matters for women of multiple identities. That is where I'm hoping my legacy to be. A couple of work that I'm doing recently is Understanding One, is where I interviewed about 140 city managers, men and women city managers, and understanding the career progression of city managers. There are about 13% women city managers in the US, and very few, less than 4% are women and men of color. Understanding how local governments, city governments perpetuated gendered and racialized processes or, and practices, and really make it harder for these individuals to exist in the systems. That is really where I'm hoping to move the needle forward, and understanding, listening to the stories and making sense of the stories, theorizing about the experiences of individuals of color, but all particularly women of color in the system. So I think really how it matters, women and women of multiple identities, particularly women of color, but also women of, including considering also immigration status, religion, or, disability status, and all that. Really bringing that into the light is where I hope my legacy would be. Thank you.
I, for one, look forward to all of it. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for your contributions. This has been a wonderful way to end out Women's History Month. And wish we had a little more time for questions, but maybe we can take one quick question in our 2 minutes we have left.
I just have a quick comment, if I may.
Perfect.
Yes. Good morning, everyone, and greetings from San Francisco. Wanted to congratulate this esteemed panel. I very much enjoyed it. But my comment specifically is I do want to draw attention and to congratulate our own Dr. Mary Guy on being the editor of JSEPA, our wonderful social equity journal. If you don't know JSEPA, you should. It's producing some great works, and again, we have Dr. Mary Guy and Brian Williams to thank for that. So thank you so much, Mary, for your great work with JSEPA. You are the inaugural editor and editor-in-chief, and we cannot be more pleased.
Ditto, ditto. Could not agree more. Dr. Rubin, we have one more quick question.
I just have to echo what Mary said in terms of 20 years. My colleague, John Bartle, who was here, I don't see, he probably had another meeting. 20 years ago, when we began our research on gender budgeting, I was told by a very, very, very prominent person in public finance that I was wasting my time. And why didn't I research something more serious? So John and I talk about this now when many of our colleagues are looking into equity in budgeting, which has become a very, very important issue. They're talking about John and me as being pioneers. So I just wanted to echo what Mary said about 20 years. And I remember standing in front of this person at a meeting of the Association of Budgeting and Financial Management, and him looking me in the face and saying, you're just wasting your time. So I just wanted to echo and thank you for a wonderful, wonderful session. And thank you for a guy running it.
Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Thank you for everything and all the inspiration you've given to all of us on the way up. And thank you to Dr. Bisho, a mentor, Dr. Elias, who has been an editor, Dr. D'Agostino, who's been an inspiration, and Dr. Guy, who is, I think, mentor to so many. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you to DSJ and Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson III for your efforts with it, and also to Dr. Irizarry for leading it now, and Dr. Diggs for all the work she did putting together this panel and making this panel what it was. It's so exciting. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.